I came to the league a good few years ago now, one of the first things I did was to look what was in the village, shop-wise. I found, I think, 5 beauty salons in the small village. That says it all. And the Lord is discreetly warning about this in the Gospel with regard to what counts and what counts slightly less. I remember in school days, we all went with our 2 religious instruction teachers to the Sophia Gardens in 1967 to hear the nationally transmitted and well-coordinated huge campaign of the great evangelizer Billy Graham. And he warned the whole of the British nation about this. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and to lose his own soul? And the result actually was quite fulminating. By the 1,000, people were coming forward to give themselves to the Lord. And whatever one says about his theology, his will and his power was certainly under the Lord's blessing. Why? The Lord was wanting with him to redeem immortal souls from hell. That's the bottom line. And we must all have that bottom line. You know what Our Lady is reported to have said in recent years, that souls are actually falling into hell like snowflakes to the ground. She can see it, we can't. Now in that context, that spirit of every missionary is still the same as it ever has been. And we in our generation have actually lost it. If you look around to what's going on in the average parish mission now, certain things are no longer said and indeed may not be said. I remember hearing this locally after some years ago. We had a parish mission, I think done by Redemptorists, and 1 or 2 told me, in practice we were not challenged. People were being left in their feel-good factor, and they didn't really move on. And we didn't see any long-term effect either on the parish, to be honest. Whereas, if one goes back only, I suppose, 50 years, a mission had a change, an effect. People actually did massively go to confession. There was great preparation, and things were said. Who has gained from the change? Is fecit cui prodest. He did it to whom it serves. You know who. Now, going back further in time, if one goes to the 1400s, there was a messy situation, actually, quite often in church life itself. People turned a blind eye. But if the Reformation took place, and the Counter-Reformation in its wake, there was a reason for it. And in that, people were being raised up by divine providence to act, but from within. And one of these was the saint of this day, who was born in 1480 in the northern part of Italy, the Veneto area. And he initially could have had a brilliant career, being from a noble family in law, but he was touched by grace powerfully and opted for ordination and had a magnetic effect. He would set up confraternities of priests and lay people, would help socially and spiritually, and then he was led to go further. But by providential help, actually, it was made possible. It was Peter Cafara who became Paul IV, Pope. And with his powerful help, he was able to set in motion what was only embryonic at the time. It was that he would react against the corruption in the clergy by giving them this invitation to return to apostolic times, the apostolic life, living together, praying together, as we find in the Acts of the Apostles, sharing all therefore, and by that fact creating places of dignified prayer and praise. That was a reaction also against what had become somewhat mechanical. It was made to buzz and be beautiful. Now, also, all these great reformers and founders of the time had one thing in common. They had precisely what I mentioned at the beginning, this zeal for souls and the true missionary instinct not to let one single one be lost. And they knew that it had to pass through the priesthood, and the sanctification of the priesthood was the sanctification of the people of God. The demon knows it too. And so it had a great success before what became far better known in a second time, also in the same period, slightly later, that coming from Ignatius of Loyola, who also had the same instinct to get them to live together and to live a regular life. But that took off even more. But we forget this one because it was eclipsed by it. The Canons Regular, the Theatines that he founded, and he had an influence on Rome, on Venice, the Veneto area, and also the south of Italy, Naples, but actually eventually died in 1547. Notice the date. It's at the heart of the period of the Council of Trent. And he is going to be therefore an early light in putting that thrust into practice, reform, but from within. Now we must remember that they're operating in a new sphere, because until then, structures had been fairly monastic. Even the mendicants, born in the 1200s more or less, were still in some ways pretty monastic. The habit, a certain measure of choir life, especially the Dominicans, conventual life was still there. Well, these were able to go further and crack that even more, especially later on with the Jesuits, which gave them a great freedom to go anywhere they wanted over the world and to take the gospel with them in its full thrust. We need to recuperate that for the clergy. We have gone quite the other way in bending over backwards to make the priest fit into society and evangelize, as it were, just by being with people. There was already, before the council, a movement in that direction in France with the worker priests, les prêtres ouvriers, which wasn't entirely successful. They tried, and it was really an awful pity in a sense, because these wonderful young priests were giving all their energy and time to manual work. That's questionable. Now, what's happened is that in practice, the priest, when he goes into a situation, often, actually, if one is honest, will be sociably acceptable. We'll go into a family, we'll talk about all kinds of things which interest the family, but is pretty reticent, if we're honest, I know from experience myself, to really spend the time in getting to the point. We actually spend a lot of time just being acceptable, cracking jokes. Well, it has an effect on getting us through to the people, but it can stop there. And it's an awful waste of spiritual time. I remember actually in the ordination retreat I did, I was given a powerful volume to read by my prior, sent off to another monastery, and I picked up this. It was a mystic who was given to praying for priests, and she'd been given to understand by the Lord that the Lord did not want this great error in the priesthood, that great chunks of time were to be given to socializing. It was something which was too human and not under his blessing. Why? A priest is the bridge between heaven and earth, and he is consecrated to God, and therefore all his time is also consecrated to God. It's not his time. And as God the Father is never on holidays and can always be got in prayer, so too the priest is actually never really on holidays. And if one deliberately makes oneself camouflaged and unavailable, one is, as it were, depriving the church, the people of God, of the presence of God on earth visibly. We don't know him, we can't see him. Whereas actually when one is visibly a priest, one is always open to all kinds of surprises, providential surprises. I remember actually all kinds of things happening in Italy, on trains, in main streets, all kinds of things. One is asked to hear confessions, give blessings, all the rest of it, because one is visible. the devil again knows it full well. The same actually applies to some extent to nuns who hide themselves. The church is deprived of the witness and also of the effect of their presence visibly in society. Why are we shy? It's the same thing at work. In conversation, we're shy to get to the point. We want to be acceptable. It applies also to lay people. Analyze your cups of coffee and tea. Where does the conversation go? Just the other day I was talking to a friend of mine who had been talking to friends of hers, and they'd all been slating Donald Trump. She listened and paused, and because they started to be puzzled when she spoke in a different way, she calmly answered, as she always would, "Do your homework." They were all taken aback. We perhaps ought to have the courage of that lassie sometimes and not be afraid, because if we are, we too are useless witnesses, black houses and not lighthouses. The gift of speech is precious. It's not wasted on the beauty salon.